Welcome back, my amazing fourth grade artists. For this project, we'll be focusing on my personal favorite artist, Vincent Van Gogh, and he was an Impressionist painter. Who was Vincent Van Gogh? Vincent was an Impressionist painter. He loved to paint using thick brushstrokes and loved to paint what he felt that movement would look like. How can we show movement in art? We can show movement in our artwork by using different lines, shapes, and textures. If we take a look at some of these pictures below, you'll see that there are different lines that go in different directions that give us the illusion that it might be moving. And in the center with the eye, you can see the thick brush strokes with paint and using texture to make it look like it sticks out of the paper. Another way that artists used texture to show movement in their painting was a style called Imposto style painting. An impasto is a technique used in painting where paint is laid out on an area or surface in very thick layers, usually thick enough that the brush or painting knife strokes are visible. So as you can see the swirls of the wind, and he uses those thick brush strokes to show movement. Now let's talk a little about background, middle ground, and foreground. If we take a look at this simple picture, you can see that the background is the sky, the middle ground is a row of a field or grass, and in the foreground in the front is the lighter green area of grass. Now let's break it down. The foreground is the part of the artwork that is closest to the viewer. It's usually somewhere at the bottom when discussing a landscape. So in this instance, we're going to start at the bottom, and our foreground is that bright green hill that looks like it's the closest to us. Next is the middle ground, and the middle ground is the space that would be between the foreground and the background. So in this case, our darker green section of the field is considered our middle ground, and it's in the middle of our paper. And now we see the background, and the background is the space that is the farthest away from the viewer, and it's usually at the top when we're doing a landscape. So in this case, our sky, that is our blue area, would be considered our background, and it's behind everything else that we're looking at in the picture. Now let's take a look at one of Vincent Van Gogh's painting called the Poppyfield. And we see that in the very front, in the foreground, would be where our poppies are, and poppies are those little red flowers. So we see the field of red poppies. That would be the foreground, which would be the closest to us. Next would be the middle ground, which is exactly what's in the middle. And what's in the middle is that green field and even some of those trees. That would be considered the middle ground. And our background, the farthest thing away from us at the top of our paper, is the sky. And the sky in this painting would be our background for our painting. So here we can clearly see the background, middle ground, and foreground. Which leads us into our next project, a Van Gogh-inspired Poppyfield, Part 1. Our learning goal for this project is a painting, and a painting is where we produce an artwork by applying paint to a two-dimensional surface, such as a piece of paper or a canvas. Our learning targets are, I can use texture in my art, I can use movement in my art, and I can create artwork inspired by other artists. The materials you'll need today are a piece of white paper, a pencil, black Sharpie, and some crayons. All right, boys and girls, let's get started. All right, boys and girls, now I want you to set up your paper horizontal, side to side, or hot dog style. First, we're going to add a wavy line for our foreground, and then a second wavy line to act as our middle ground. So first, let's add our foreground line, and next, we're going to add a partial wavy line for our middle ground. Next, you're going to get some crayons. I would prefer getting some white crayons and maybe some lighter blue crayons. And we're going to draw some wind in our background that's going to show us a little bit of movement in the background to our poppy field. So with your white or blue or light blue crayon, I want you to go ahead and I want you to draw some swirly lines in the background that would act as movement and show the wind in the background, just as Vincent Van Gogh did in some of his paintings. Next, I want you to get a green crayon, and we're going to add some texture into our middle ground. And the way we're going to show some texture is we're going to draw some little dashed lines to show the rough grass. And when we looked at one of Vincent Van Gogh's paintings earlier, we saw how he added texture with that Imposto style. We're going to be creating somewhat of an Imposto style by using crayons, and later we'll paint over top of it. But right now, we're showing like those brush strokes that we saw in Vincent Van Gogh's paintings, and I want you to continue adding the dashed lines to your middle ground. Now put your project somewhere safe so we can continue working on it next week. See you next time, boys and girls.